Item 10C, receive a report and provide direction regarding amendments to the San Bruno Municipal Code, Chapter 7.24, restricted street use, oversized vehicles. Marc.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, the topic before you tonight is a relatively minor but hopefully useful proposed change to our ordinance regarding parking of oversized vehicles. So staff had received a suggestion that some oversized vehicles are moving around every 12 hours and thus avoiding getting ticketed, and that was negatively impacting some of the neighborhoods in which those vehicles are located. And the reason why they were moving every 12 hours is because the current ordinance requires the police to warn the operator, driver, owner of those vehicles before they're ticketed. So the suggestion was to simply amend the ordinance and eliminate the requirement that their warning be issued before a citation can be given. So the practical effect of that is it would allow the police to cite the owner of the vehicle if that's appropriate, and to determine whether it's appropriate or not, you have to go back to what was the reason for the 12 hours. And staff understands, this was before some of our times, that the reason was to allow individuals who owned recreational vehicles to bring them over to their house, load them up, and get ready to go camping or whatever they were going to do the next morning. So that was the reason for the 12-hour period. In any event, the police would retain discretion, even if you eliminated that requirement, to warn under those and other similar kinds of circumstances. So we thought that it would be a reasonable first step, at least, to address this issue if it's occurring of oversized vehicles moving around in order to avoid getting ticketed. While we were at it, we couldn't resist the temptation to make a couple of other tweaks to the ordinance. One of them was merely to change the weight in one of the other sections to conform with state law. State law has changed since that ordinance was written, so instead of 6,000 pounds, it's actually now 10, because there's a lot of passenger vehicles that are 6,000 pounds. And then we also did a little cleanup and a couple of words in that weight section of the ordinance. So this relatively minor change is reflected in the ordinance that's proposed in your staff report, and it's open tonight for discussion and direction by the City Council, any comments from the public, and the Chief and I are available to answer any questions. That concludes my report.
Any discussion?
I had a quick question for you mentioned in the beginning of your staff report that since May, there's been a large increase in complaints, and then also on the reporting app. Do we know how many of those complaints involved RVs?
I don't have that information. Okay. The police chief may know, but I don't know that the information was sorted in that manner.
It'd be interesting to know because, I mean, for the history of this ordinance.
Good evening. As far as specifically for recreational vehicles or motorhomes, it's hard to track those. Very few calls that we receive involve recreational vehicles or motorhomes. I did a little bit more digging in addition to what's in the staff report, and I can tell you that from the first of the year through today's date, the police department has received 142 calls regarding the parking of oversized vehicles. 57 of those complaints, or 57 vehicles, were issued warnings pursuant to the code as a result of those calls. An additional 13 were actually cited, meaning they did not move in the time period that they were required to move. And the remainder of those vehicles did not meet the criteria for being oversized, or they had been moved before the police department's arrival. So specifically with RVs and motorhomes, I can tell you that we don't see a whole lot of that anymore. Most of the calls that we get involve different types of vehicles.
And just for everyone's information, can you let everyone know what is an oversized vehicle?
The length is 22 feet and the width is 6.5 feet. It's not to exceed either one of those parameters. That's one code section. There's a separate code section for commercial vehicles that the city attorney referenced, which now prohibits vehicles in excess of 6,000 pounds to be parked on the street. However, as the city attorney mentioned, state law has been changed to make that requirement 10,000 miles.
And for example, a 2017 Dodge extended cab pickup truck, Any idea how large that vehicle is?
Yep, pickup trucks and pickup trucks with campers are specifically exempt, and they're listed in the code specifically. Their width obviously wouldn't be a problem. I'm sorry, the length obviously wouldn't be a problem, but the width is getting pretty close. So we'd
Yeah.
have to, 6.5 feet, some of the new trucks with dual tires can get pretty wide. However, the code does address pickup trucks and pickup trucks with campers and exempts them.
Thank you.
Okay. Marty, you have anything?
Kind of want to hear from the public. I think this is a first whittling away of the problem in parking. It's not going to solve it, clearly, but it's something that I'm glad we're going forward with.
Okay. Any comments from the public? Just come to the podium and tell us your name and your street, please.
My name is Jairo Rodriguez. I live on 6th Avenue. The biggest problem we have is oversized vehicles. I'm talking about 3-axle dump trucks that are constantly driving through 6th Avenue. And the reason is because of all the warehouses and pretty much anything industrial is on Shaw Road and 7th Avenue. And they're using 6th Avenue as a shortcut to get to 101. If anybody happens to drive by, you can see how torn up the street is compared to 5th, 4th, and 3rd Avenue. I have sent multiple emails and started in December of last year. Signs were eventually placed saying no trucks. It was a no truck sign that was placed on 6th Avenue and on Walnut Street, but the placement of the sign is completely blocked by an electrical pole. It's completely out of sight. Nobody can see it as they're making that turn, and it's too far into the street to where most of the trucks that make the turn are too far into the street, and it's a nightmare having to back up onto San Bruno Avenue to keep going their route. Cars get hit from time to time. They just keep going. Between neighbors, we try to watch over each other. Once in a while, somebody will catch the drivers driving by and pretty much force the drivers to give any information, insurance and whatnot, to make a report. This problem's been going on for years. What can be done about it? The sign is not in view within sight of anybody, so I mean, it's constant emails and nothing has been done. There's a sign on Walnut Street. Somebody turned the sign away, so anybody that approaches that street won't see the sign at all. I would just like to see a solution to the problem. It's been
Okay.
over a year.
Thank you. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Mindy Beatty. I live on Cedar Avenue. Is that
Cedar?
Yes. My question is about looking forward on the oversized vehicles. So cities like Palo Alto are having issues with people parking RVs and just moving them all the time. Will this 10,000-pound limit still keep recreational vehicles from moving in? Because given the housing crisis, this is what's happening in cities like Palo Alto. So will this still prevent any recreational vehicles in the future, or is this still too small of a size? That's my question. Thank you.
Pam from 7th Avenue. I just have 2 questions and more clarification than anything. You said the code now is 10,000 pounds, is it? Or is it 6?
6 now.
6 now, but you're upping it to the state of 10?
That's the proposal in front of the city council.
The proposal, okay. And the second thank you. And the second question is, driving in this evening to this meeting, there's a very beautiful cab to a rig parked in front of the park. Would that fall in the, I mean, it's a huge, it's a huge cab without the trailer. But would that also fall into the same?
I suppose if it's wide enough, huh?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the police would have to go out and check it out. If
Right.
the gross vehicle rating is over 6, then it would qualify. If it's over 22 feet long and 6 feet 6 inches wide, it would qualify under the size ordinance.
Okay.
Fred Schmidt, live on the corner of 3rd and Pine. Have a lot of trouble with limousines and Uber drivers, and they get really rude. I got one that drives by all the time. My 9-year-old grandson, he's always asking, how come this guy drives by, beeps the horn, and flips me off? You know, it's getting really bad over there. We need to do something with the parking. Thank you.
That's 3rd and Pine, is that correct?
Yeah, 3rd and Pine.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
I apologize. It seemed like this is being me speaking too much, but this is also about the oversized. I'm talking about, and I have pictures, a school bus, not the lone school bus, but the half size. The neighbor does not park it in front of his or her house, but on Flora, basically eliminating parking from the ones that we don't even have a driveway. Also, there are residents on Milton Avenue that bring trucks, minivans, cable guys, basically work cable with all the equipment. They park on Friday and don't move it until Monday. So basically, the parking in front of their houses is taken. So this, please help us remedy that. Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening. My name is Callista. I live on Poplar Avenue. I wanted to understand. I think it's obviously parking is a big issue here, but I think the lowest hanging fruit is to just get oversized commercial vehicles off. So what I don't no warning, that's the rule. They don't get to have commercial vehicles in the public space. So I'm hoping at the end of tonight that that's going to be the rule. What I don't understand, what I'd love clarification on is, are we talking about no commercial vehicles, this cab that was just brought up that is perhaps shorter than the length and width that was just discussed and or weight, that's still a commercial vehicle? Or
We're talking this evening about oversized vehicles.
Yeah, sorry.
can oversized be also commercial? I think it should just be,
Mark?
Why don't you go ahead and finish, and then I'll address your questions.
All right.
go ahead, that's it. I just really, oversized vehicles for sure, but at the very least, commercial vehicles should not be on the street. I wanted to make sure that we don't solve one problem here without thinking about the entirety.
Okay. I'll
common
ask the chief
sense.
for some comments when we're all done.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Bill Goff, Maple Avenue. My concern is a couple of PG&E rather large trucks. One parks on Canes, right at the top of the hill, and one on Cherry or Cedar Avenue, and they're right at the top of the hill. And they definitely, I think, are more than 6.5 feet wide. But I don't know whether these PG&E workers are on duty or not, but they're rather big trucks. And you have to go past the middle of the street in order to get your car by. So, anyway, that's it.
Okay. Anyone else?
Just a quick comment on that. I also believe they shouldn't be out there at all because they're so wide. Not only are they tearing up our streets because they're heavy, they also block traffic, and the avenue streets are so narrow as it is that when you're coming around them, sometimes you're almost going head on to oncoming traffic, which makes it really safe for the residents. So that's another thing to consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan Mersney, Keynes Avenue. For over a year now, I have been trying to get PG&E to take its trucks off the street. I've been trying to work with them. I keep getting the runaround and being sent to somebody else. I finally got to someone who said they would speak to Councilmember Marty Medina. about a suggestion that we found a public parking area that they could park their trucks in that would be close to their homes so that they could have quick access in case of an emergency in the middle of the night, some power line has gone down. PG&E has not been receptive to this at all. So I'm going to ask the council if they would consider being a little bit more forceful in tone with PG&E to say, we'd really like to find a solution with you. Please work with us. Because right now they're basically saying, we're PG&E, we just don't care. And it is a safety issue, particularly the one that Mr. Goff was speaking about on Keynes Avenue. The worker parks his truck, puts a cone out, the safety as safe as it can be, but unfortunately, as you're coming around that corner in a heavily traveled street, for those of us that don't know it's there, it really comes up on you very quickly. And I have seen numerous people have to basically swerve or throw their brakes on because of it. So that one particularly is a very serious safety issue, not just a blight to our city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Shabina. I live on 4th Avenue. I wanted to address the oversized vehicle issue that we're having in our neighborhoods. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. We have multiple taco trucks which are in our neighborhood. And I understand that everyone's trying to give, they give the citations and they have a lot of time where they can move the vehicles. But I think that warnings shouldn't be issued. I think tickets should be issued. So that would really address the problem that we're having. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Nick Lopez and Mastic Avenue. I was talking with Steve Seymour earlier today over in New Mexico. We want to make sure that we're clear about the topic, the difference between business vehicles and commercial vehicles. Every pickup truck has a commercial plate. So we call it a commercial vehicle. It gets confusing, and it gets confusing in the eyes of the law as well. So I think most of the people are complaining about business vehicles. Of course, there's vehicles like the Mr. Reuter truck that need to be on call. Some level of provision for PG&E somewhere. But for the most part, I don't think people like having business vehicles parked in their neighborhood because they're large, they tend to be over large, and they just, it's really an aesthetic burden. I think that's why people are most unhappy about it. Everyone who's come up to speak about this was speaking about a business vehicle. It's probably not within the scope of this particular change in the ordinance, but we should at least address it, acknowledge it, and maybe put it in the plan to visit it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mark?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, if you could just make a couple of quick comments. So I think that the discussion by the public has outlined many of the different competing interests that the city has to weigh in determining how to address parking of vehicles on its streets. So, for example, the current ordinance with respect to size does not only apply to commercial vehicles, it applies to all vehicles. So that's an important distinction. There has been some comments about commercial vehicles being a blight on the neighborhood. Well, one of the things that state law requires is that any parking restrictions that are adopted have a rational basis and be related to a legitimate city interest. So, for example, it is not a city interest to regulate the kinds of businesses that people operate or that people work for. It is not the city's interest to regulate what kinds of vehicles people own or are allowed to own when they live in our city. It is in the city's interest to regulate the parking and traveling of certain kinds of vehicles on its streets as long as there's a rational basis for doing so. So what this ordinance has tried to do, and what the changes that are being proposed are trying to do, is provide the police with a little bit of extra discretion to cite those vehicles to solve a problem that we believe is occurring. It'll be interesting to see whether that problem actually is occurring once more citations are issued, if that's the case, and whether the problem is ameliorated. And so what normally when staff is asked to look at an issue, we try to first figure out what is the problem that we're trying to solve. And then we go gather some data, and then we analyze the data, and then we provide some alternatives, and then we evaluate those alternatives to make sure that they don't have any unintended consequences. So here, we did it a little bit backwards. And instead what we did is we took what the community was saying was a problem that they perceived and tried to come up with a relatively simple fix for that problem. So it remains to be seen whether the fix to the problem actually solves that particular problem or not. It is certainly not going to solve many of the other problems that some of the residents are talking about. And as I say, the city is not in the business of regulating what kinds of cars people can own if they're not oversized or if they're not overweight. So, and the over the weight limit by state law. So these are a number of the considerations that we're trying to sort out. And staff thought that this was a reasonable first step to try to see whether this particular change would have an effect on the number of oversized vehicles that are parking in the neighborhood. Last thing I'll say is we don't actually know how many oversized vehicles are parked in the neighborhoods. The fact that we've gotten a number of complaints is not an indication of how many vehicles there are. It's only an indication of the number of complaints. So we have not done a survey of what kinds of oversized vehicles those are. We don't know if they're commercial or otherwise. And then finally, it's important to note that under state law, there's a definition of commercial vehicle that is very different than what lay people think a commercial vehicle is. So a commercial vehicle is not your Ford Explorer with Acme painting plastered on the side of it. That is not a commercial vehicle under state law. So there are some differences about how these kinds of ordinances can be applied and adopted so that individuals who live in the city can have reasonable access to the streets and reasonable access to their residences.
Thank you. Chief, I have a couple of quick questions. Some of the comments this evening did not pertain to what we're really talking about, but I, got some, let some people vent a little bit. But for instance, I've seen the PG&E truck that has the cone on it parked over there on Canes and stuff. And what's the restriction on vehicles? There's some in front of St. Robert's. I see the guy moves it every once in a while. Sometimes he doesn't. Is it a 72-hour thing with DMV? Is it? Tell me about things like PG&E or where people have to be on call, for instance.
Sure. Well, as the city attorney mentioned, we're talking about two different code sections. We're talking about commercial vehicles and oversized vehicles, which there's two different codes. There are two different animals entirely. The oversized vehicle is subject to the length and width restrictions that we mentioned before. Is really a separate issue from the commercial vehicle. The commercial vehicle is addressed in the section that deals with weight. Right now it's 6,000 pounds. State law says it should be 10, so that we'll see what happens there. There is a caveat and an exemption to the commercial vehicle code section when it comes to weight, and that means that if for example, if you're driving your employer's vehicle, or even if it's your own vehicle, and it exceeds that limit, you're allowed to park within close proximity to your residence. As long as you're not running a business out of your residence, the code allows you to do that. So if you work for PG&E or any other utility, and you may drive a vehicle that may meet the length and width requirements that the city mandates, but it exceeds the weight limitation, and you're parking it in close proximity to your home because that's the vehicle you drive back and forth to work, that's permitted under the code.
Okay, thanks. Anything else for the chief while he's up here?
Through the chair.
Ken?
Chief, gentlemen, the resident got up and using 6th Avenue as a truck route. Any ideas on how we can try to alleviate that?
Sure, I do. But, it may be a different discussion. So truck routes and parking are two different things, obviously. Commercial routes, we have identified commercial routes throughout the city. I believe we have 4 of them. I'd have to go back and check. I can pretty much name them. However, it does allow trucks and commercial oversized vehicles to make deliveries to specific addresses and to conduct business. So, for example, if you were moving into a home, it would be permissible for a moving truck to drive down your street and unload your items. If you own a business in a residential area, it's permissible for a truck to make deliveries to that business. As you know, we have one traffic enforcement officer that works 4 days a week, and he has a whole bunch of responsibilities, and this is on his radar, and we've done enforcement in that area. We're very aware of the Shaw Road issue in South San Francisco, and Walnut and 6th and 7th Avenues being used as routes, and we do the enforcement that we can there. But if there's deliveries going to within that neighborhood, that's permissible under both state law and the municipal code.
Through the chair.
If I could just add to what the chief said, though, the gentleman, the speaker from the audience this evening did provide a useful suggestion, that just simply that we can make sure that the signage is actually visible. So we will take care of that.
So just, and thank you to the city manager, Mr. Rodriguez had brought up about the sign being blocked, and then the one that's turned around on Walnut, those two.
Right. Okay. Irene?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, and maybe several more signs. Just 2 doesn't seem quite adequate. So if we put those 2 that are there highly visible and maybe look at adding some more if that's appropriate.
Yes, we're all for, from a police department perspective, we can never have never have enough signs and providing people direction. I will tell you that we're going to cite whether the signage is acceptable or not, and let somebody challenge that in court if they're violating a code. It's just a matter of having personnel out there to do
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
To the chief, it was brought up regarding the school bus, which we've heard before. I know it's not the regular school bus that you would believe is taking the high school students. I know it's not that size. And then also vans who are cable providers. So they're allowed because obviously it meets within the size. They can park because that's their driver's use for their work. So you've indicated that. And what about the school bus that's brought up?
It depends on the code says passenger buses are exempt from the oversized vehicle. So we'd have to go out and look at what that bus is being used for and determine whether it qualifies as a passenger bus pursuant to the vehicle code. But if it is a passenger bus that's used for a legitimate purpose to transport individuals, then it may be exempt. We'd have to look at that and see exactly what type of bus that is.
And then Fred had brought up on 3rd and Pine about the limo and Uber. I know Uber can go anywhere, but as far as the limos, if residents feel that they have a variety of limos that are being parked, that could be an indication of a business being operated out of the home, which then that would not be allowed if they did not have the proper permit.
That's true, as well as we've had an issue several years ago with limousine staging in that area. We don't see that. There may be limousines going to certain locations in that, but there used to be a problem associated with the airport, and the airport helped us out by identifying a lot for those vehicles. So we don't see that relative to SFO, but I do understand about vehicles for hire going in and out of neighborhoods, and the code addresses those vehicles specifically and exempts them from a lot of regulations because they're dropping off and picking up. Or they might live there.
Marty?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, if
Yes.
I may, I just wanted to follow up on something that the chief said, and also for the benefit of the public. There have been a couple of comments made about people operating businesses out of their home. That's actually an extremely difficult and intrusive determination for a city to make. Just because a neighbor calls us and says, well, we think so-and-so is operating a business out of their home, that doesn't constitute evidence on which the city can base a citation or on which the city can conduct code enforcement. The city has to do an investigation. It involves perhaps obtaining entry to the person's home, which they're not obligated to provide, and a whole host of other things. So just because somebody has a car parked outside their house with either a commercial plate on it or a sign on the side that says Acme Painting, doesn't mean that they're operating a business out of their home, nor does it mean that the city could ever prove that they're operating a business out of their home. So I think it's important for this. And I should also say that's not an ordinance that the police department is going to enforce. That's a code enforcement issue, which is separate. So the police officers aren't going to go around and try to determine whose doing what in their homes, unless a crime is being committed. So the important thing to understand is that the traffic enforcement is traffic enforcement, not enforcement of what people are doing with their cars or what they're doing inside their homes.
Thank you. Marty?
Thank you. So this is a great first step, I think, in chipping away at the problem. I think I want to thank Steve Seymour for bringing this to my attention originally. And here we are today. Again, an example of a resident taking charge of something that's important to them and bring it to the council. We'll find a way to make things better for you and your neighborhood. We just got to work together at it. It takes a lot of time. I think the big thing here is the key word in this ordinance is that the police officer retains the discretion to issue the ticket. It doesn't mean automatically they're going to get a ticket when you call to see that oversized vehicle. I would like to retain the 6,000 pound. Millbrae does it. We have state law that says it can be 10,000, or they suggest, but it's not. It's up to the city to determine the exact weight. Is that correct?
So I don't think that's correct. It appears that the state law was changed to 10,000 pounds after our city ordinance. So the fact that Millbrae retains it may just be an indication of the fact that they haven't gotten to changing it yet.
Right. So in the case where this big rig, as my son would call it, you know, the big nice red one, I saw it too. Now, that is allowed then? If it doesn't belong in a residential neighborhood, a big rig. Maybe you can get back to us and give us an update on how that would work.
Well, I can tell you.
Oh, you can tell me. No,
absolutely.
Better.
Yeah, if it exceeds 6,000 pounds, it should not be parked there. And right now, it would be subject to a citation. However, if the driver of that vehicle came back and said that he was parking in proximity to his or her home, and challenged that citation, they may have a case based on the way that the code section is written.
Right. So I don't like that. I don't think anybody would like to have,
So just to clarify, that exemption only applies to the code section that deals with weight. The oversized vehicle, there is no exemption for parking in proximity to your home. We're talking about two different code sections.
Okay. My other comment then would be, I understand somebody has a big truck, a welding truck, that's how they work, they come back, whatever they're doing. But we're seeing numerous of the same company truck, whether it be Acme or whatever company it is out there, that would give an indication that they're running a business out of the home. Possibly there's 3 of the same trucks there on the street, parked probably on the lawn in some cases. No, honestly. So that would be something in the hands of code enforcement, that they would need to get a home occupation permit to operate that business because they're operating a business out of a home. But will that code enforcement deal with it? The one comment in the staff report here about any van pool vehicle is not a commercial vehicle. That's based on our interpretation of the code, our writing of the code.
That is the existing. That's what the existing code says.
So I'm okay with the van pool vehicle coming around and picking people up, but parking and just staying, and there's more than just one. I mean, they're in numerous neighborhoods. So could we change that, Mark, now? That any van pool, that the van pool can't park. They could come by and do business, but they just can't park because their size would be too big, right? Because they're exempted if they're a van pool vehicle.
So we are here to get direction from the city council about what to bring back. And we're certainly happy to look at any of your suggestions that the city council directs us to look at to bring back in the ordinance revision. What's proposed at the moment is a change to the 12-hour warning period and the other minor amendments that we've recommended.
Got it. The last request, as everybody or a number of members here were asking for additional signage, that obvious one. I believe the city bought some cameras not too long ago, last year. Could we put one of those cameras up, and perhaps that'll be a big deterrent that a number of these truck drivers, the word will get around. Don't come down Shaw and make a right, because you're going to get a ticket. And they put a camera up there, and that'll be an additional deterrent. Is that possible?
I will tell you from an enforcement perspective, that's difficult. There is state law that allows for the video ticketing of red light violations, but it does not allow for additional vehicle code violations. So I deal to the city attorney, but I think that would be difficult to issue citations by proxy based on video evidence. That's difficult with infractions.
Right, I would agree. It's not authorized by
Okay.
state law.
All right. I think that's it.
Okay. Anyone else? Ken?
Could I just get it, since the chief is up there again, in the beginning, he said there were, in 2017, 142 complaints, 57 warnings, 13 cited. So.
I should, there has to be a warning, right now there has to be a warning before a citation.
So I'm assuming that those 57 warnings were involved with the 12-hour, possibly
Yes,
the 12-hour issue.
of the 57 warnings, 13 of those failed to adhere to the warning and were issued a citation. That does mean, though, that, that's about 1/3 of the complaints. 2/3 of the complaints we received were either no longer there or they did not meet the criteria to be a violation.
Okay. So I'm asking is, of those warnings, I mean, if we do adopt the 12-hour, eliminate the 12-hour time period, a lot of those complaints could possibly get cited right away.
Yeah, what you'd see is, you'd see a much larger percentage of the 57 warnings that, instead of 13, you'd probably see a lot more that were issued in citations.
Good.
Not that we wouldn't still try to solve problems and address issues in the neighborhood by all different types of means, but having this as a tool in our toolbox would give us a little bit more leverage in dealing with those things.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? I think, you have a quick? Thank you.
So I wanted to speak again about the trucks. Hi, Rodriguez. I live on 6th Avenue. I see the trucks that go by there. They're repeat offenders. They're not, once in a while you'll have one truck that's probably from out of state. They happen to see the sign and they will usually try to back up. But unfortunately, it's mainly local businesses that constantly pass through. I got pictures and videos of the traffic they cause when you got two similar sized vehicles going towards each other. It's a narrow street. They can't fit. One of them's going to have to back up one way or another. On multiple occasions, I was able to approach the drivers while they were stopped and point out to the signs and tell them the sign is there. Can you not see it? And they were being ignorant. They refused to look in that direction. They just kept repeating they don't see the sign. It was just complete ignorance. You see FedEx trucks, UPS making deliveries, but rarely. Like I said, 95% of the time, it's businesses that are actually driving through 6th Avenue as a shortcut.
Okay, I think you heard that the signage will be maintained and possibly increased, and the chief is very aware of the situation, so I think you'll see more enforcement.
Okay, and then another note, neighbors running businesses out of their home. I think last year we had some new neighbors that moved in. He's a mechanic. He has anywhere between 5 to 10 cars, and he's using street parking cars in front of everybody's houses. And I have talked to some of my neighbors, and they have issues parking their own vehicles because this gentleman's running a business out of his shop.
Then you should put a complaint to code enforcement, they can get on it.
Okay. He's doing it on the street. I don't know.
Yeah.
I got pictures and everything, so I don't know.
It's not legal.
Okay.
Right. Okay, violation. Yes.
Hi, Wendy Ambrose, San Anselmo Avenue North. I just want to bring up a couple of things. I'm being the devil's advocate here. I believe the red rig belongs to a guy that lives just a block or two away. That's his work. I also feel the van pool. It's a van pool, so there are fewer people driving. If the driver of the van pool can't park in front of his house to go pick up 15 people, seems a little, I mean, and I'm fed up with parking, but I'm just saying that there are times that we need to appreciate that our citizens are working and are trying to work with their large vehicles in our small streets. And I think that we need to not maybe be so unilateral, because the flip of this is if we just keep making it harder for people trying to make their living, or the van pool thing for sure, you know, why would they do it? If they have to park 6 blocks from their house to be legal, you know, in our town, in our city. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. But.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
So I'm sensitive to that. So maybe the one carpool van, right? But not like 3 or 4. I mean, that's just.
Well, not in the same place. I mean,
Right. But I hear you, and it's expensive to live here, and people need to work. Just that we don't have the space, you know, and we have to be aware of that. So.
Okay, so staff is looking for, and I kind of hope we don't have Acme Painting, because they got slammed pretty good tonight, whoever they are, so. But anyway, staff is looking for some direction here. So what's your pleasure?
Through the
way
chair.
It's written? Irene?
Thank you. I'd like you, Mark, to say it again, because there's a lot of people here, I think, don't quite understand still the difference between a business truck, what the law says a commercial or business vehicle is, and what they may assume is, because I heard people say, oh, no more limousines on our streets, no business trucks anywhere. You know, if that doesn't happen, we're going to be disappointed. Okay. So I'd like clarification on that, and also why where our ordinances come from, what restrictions we can and cannot do. Like somebody suggested, keep the 6,000 pounds. We can't do that because the state allows 10, right? Mm-hmm. So could you give a little more about that?
Sure. One of the things I didn't bring with me was the section of the vehicle code that defines commercial vehicles. It's section 220, I believe. I don't know why I remember the number. But what it really addresses are vehicles that are used for the purpose of either hauling people or materials. So they're not passenger vehicles just by virtue of the fact that there's, as I say, Acme Painting on the side of it, and we have a couple of cans of paint in the, you know, in the trunk. So there's a very specific definition that is usually not the kind of vehicles, some of the kind of vehicles that people are complaining about, but not all. So that's on the commercial vehicle issue. As far as how far can the city go, you know, that's an interesting question. The state has said that the state wants to stay out of the minutia of parking, so it's up to cities to figure out what to do. But the limitations are that those regulations must be reasonable, they can't be arbitrary, and the last word that the cases use is they can't be confiscatory. So that's a fancy way of saying you can't prevent people from getting to their property or from engaging in gainful occupation by making your parking so restrictive that people can't get around the city and they lose their constitutional right to travel. So there are limitations, and a number of the suggestions that we've heard relate to specific kinds of vehicles, to people who are engaged in certain occupations, and we have to be very careful when navigating those waters.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, direction to our city attorney.
Well,
The
I'll
way-
introduce the
Irene?
resolution. Oh, thank you. I'll
So there-
introduce the resolution as it stands.
Well, it's no resolution, it's just
Oh,
looking
sorry.
for
Direction?
direction.
Yeah, if the council is interested, I could bring back, you know, a report with these changes in the ordinance, provide a little bit extra detail about both enforcement and signage, and then you can take a look at it and decide if you want to introduce that at an upcoming meeting.
Okay, is that all right with everyone? Marty?
Yeah, I mean, the 12, I mean, for sure, the 12-hour issue is eliminated. Doesn't look like there's any need for RVs, but that'll still be included.
Right. One more thing, yeah.
I was wondering if staff could contact South City and ask if they could put a sign on Shaw as they're coming down the street, knowing that you cannot take your commercial vehicle through San Bruno, do not enter, do not collect 200, don't pass go.
Okay. So, Mark, you have your direction?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you to the members of the public for all of your comments.
Okay.